Hello and welcome to today's webinar on SERDP and ESTCP funding opportunities. My name is Sarah Kearsley and I will be moderating today's session. We will get started in a few moments. While we wait for others to log on, I would like to cover a few logistical items. Today's broadcast will be listen only. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat box on your toolbar to ask for help. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. You may submit questions by using the Q&A option on your toolbar. You do not need to wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit them in advance of that session. The phone lines will remain listen only throughout the presentation, so we will not be taking any questions verbally. We will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. Please note that both the audio and the presentation of today's session will be archived on our solicitation webpage in case you would like to refer to them in the future. Today's speakers are Dr. Herb Nelson, the Director of SERDP and ESTCP, and Dr. Robin Nissan, the SERDP and ESTCP Weapon Systems and Platforms Program Manager. Before I turn it over to Herb and Robin, I would like to remind phone participants that this is a listen-only session. If you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A option on your toolbar. Herb.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome everyone to the webinar today. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of the programs, and then I will turn it over to Robin to discuss in detail the statements of need and the ESTCP topic that we're talking about. This will be a little different than we often do because usually we're talking about either a SERDP or an ESTCP solicitation. Today we're talking about both, so maybe 1 or 2 more minutes longer in the introduction. But I'll get off of it quickly as I can so that we can get on to the topic most of you came to hear, which is the details of the solicitation. So we are 2 programs. The Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program on your left is a science and technology program, and the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program is a demonstration validation program. So that is shown in some detail on the next slide, which you just see now. This is really how we manage technology development and how the Department of Defense manages technology development, looking at the progression of an idea or of a technology from basic and applied research through advanced development onto demonstration and validation. SERDP is the left side of the screen, basic research through advanced development. For those of you that are familiar with the DoD lingo, that's 6.1 to 6.3 or BA1 to BA3. And then on the left side of the screen, which is the purview of ESTCP, that's demonstration validation. So DoD people would call that BA4 or 6.4. All of this these days is we're located in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment. So SERDP and ESTCP really have 2 sets of drivers. This one is our main driver, actually, sustainability of ranges, facilities, and operations. I'm not going to talk about it much today because we've got a very narrow topic. I'm going to move on to our second set of drivers, which is on the left side, remediation of contamination from past practices. And then on the right side, smarter ideas so we don't get ourselves where we have to deal with it like we do on the left side. And the bulk of today's topic is on the right side of this screen, sometimes called pollution prevention, better ways to do work, achieve compliance. So the topics we're going to talk about today fall into that category. So we manage ourselves administratively in 5 program areas. You can see them on the screen here. The topic of today's webinar and the solicitation are mostly on the top left, weapon systems and platforms. This has to do with materials, processes, maintenance actions in the Department of Defense. And a little bit, one of the statements of need in SERDP are under the Environmental Restoration Program area, which is the top one on the right. And that is traditional chemical cleanup. And you'll see as we get to the SONs which one is which. So this is just a quick outline of the SERDP and ESTCP process. I don't want to belabor this, but we receive requirements from the services, from other areas in the Department of Defense. We have so-called technical committees, which are made up of representatives of the services and also the SERDP partner agencies, DOE and EPA. That leads us to develop topics for solicitation. That's what we're talking about today, of course, Proposals then come in, which are evaluated by these technical committees, and that leads to funded projects. So we're in between solicitations and proposals right now, and we're talking about that process. So this is a quick sort of summary of what SERDP and ESTCP are looking for. Obviously on the left, SERDP being a research and development program, says in the top bullet, of course, proof of concept type projects, all the way through advanced technology development. So those of you that are quite familiar with DoD science will know that the late stage of advanced technology development can be relatively applied. So when you're thinking about your SERDP ideas, think about that. On the right-hand side of the slide is ESTCP. This, as I said earlier, is really a demonstration validation program. We want to take the results of SERDP or other funded, it doesn't have to be SERDP, of course, or other funded R&D efforts, and transition them out of the lab, get to an actual Department of Defense installation, do things in conjunction with regulators, it's sort of on the bottom large bullet, regulators and other end users to really facilitate insertion into DoD use. So talking just a little bit about ESTCP, the requirements here are a little more specific. In terms of SERDP, of course, I think many of you will be familiar with how to do an R&D program. ESTCP really needs all of the things that are on this slide. It needs to be a mature technology that is ready for demonstration. This is not a research project at ESTCP. We want, as I said before, partner with stakeholders. We want really to have DoD stakeholders involved so that a successful project can lead to technology transfer. And the bottom bullet, of course, technology transfer is the goal of this. So we use a little bit different words for the two programs because at one time they were separate programs. SERDP solicitations are referred to as statements of need. There are several ways to do this. You can either have a limited scope project, which is in the second small bullet, which is a 1 year limited to $200,000 effort, sort of a proof of principle, or a traditional multi-year project. You will see when Robin talks about the statements of need, and there were the two statements of need in SERDP, that in each of them we're interested in either full proposal, what we call a core proposal, or a limited scope proposal. We certainly intend to make multiple awards per statement of need. You can either, most of you, I presume, will be responding to the broad agency announcement, but there's also federal calls for DoD and other federal agencies. ESTCP, there's not anything comparable to the limited scope because this is a full-scale demonstration at a defense site. Just like SERDP, though, we intend to make multiple awards per topic. There's only one ESTCP topic Robin will talk to you about in a minute. And just like on the SERDP case, you can either apply through the broad agency announcement or through the DoD or federal call that's not non-DoD agencies. So the process is relatively parallel with a few small changes. Up at the top, of course, the calls for proposals. We're in between that and proposal submission right now. There is one gate to pass before a proposal is considered any further, and that is the subject matter responsive to the calls? That's, don't stretch too hard. They have to be responsive to the calls. And in the case of ESTCP, is the technology, mature enough for ESTCP? Then we go to peer review in the case of SERDP, not ESTCP, technical committee review, and then in the case of SERDP, approval by our scientific advisory board. That leads to selection. Oh, we're not switching. We're going to in a minute. There we go. And so ESTCP you see is relatively the same, although there is no peer review, of course, because these are demonstration validation. And instead of scientific advisory board presentation, there's an in-purpose briefing to the technical. So here are the dates that I think we and you are interested in. The one in the top line is the most important. The proposals are due September the 12th at 2 p.m. We really cannot extend this deadline. So please pay attention and don't miss that deadline. Every year there's one or two people that call me up at 5 o'clock and say, oh man, I forgot. And I have to say, oh man, too bad. So please don't miss the deadline. We will try to turn this around relatively quickly. We're looking for a month or so turnaround, beginning to brief the sort of ESTCP Technical Committee in the case of ESTCP in October, maybe late October 19, notifying everybody November 19. We'd really like to get these projects pointing toward initiation in spring of 2020. So you see at the bottom of this slide is the website. All this stuff is repeated on the website. In fact, almost everything we're going to say today is repeated on the website. So you can certainly get your questions answered if you need anything else. So the proposal selection criteria are relatively parallel. I've already talked about this a little bit. There's clearly a relevance gate that must be passed. Is the technology proposed relevant to the statement of need? And then in ESTCP, the other pass-fail gate is the technology mature enough for a demonstration? Beyond that, it's the standard, I think, to most of you. Technical merit is the most important along with personnel. Then comes cost and transition plan in each of the two areas. Sorry, stumbling there. So always we get a question at these webinars, what does it take to get funded from SERDP or ESTCP? And I think it ought to be pretty straightforward, but here's a little summary of what is the hallmark of successful proposal. Unstated in all of these is almost the bottom bullet of each. Technically sound or focus on the technical approach. We definitely need a technology that is responsive to the call, in which the details are spelled out well enough that the peer reviewers or the technical committee, in the case of ESTCP, can understand what you propose to do and can understand why it will be a benefit to the DoD. So please be very clear to spell that out in your proposals. Okay, so that's the end of the introduction, which of course I didn't want to belabor, so we have plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm going to turn it now over to my colleague Robin Nissan, who is the Weapon Systems and Platforms Program Manager, and he's going to talk about the two statements of need in the ESTCP topic.
Thank you, Herb. So we have two SERDP statements of need, one of them coming out of environmental restoration, one of them coming out of weapon systems and platforms. I'll talk about the environmental restoration statement of need first. It's on ecotoxicity of fluorine-free surfactants and surfactant formulations. We will be demonstrating or developing new AFFF alternatives, aqueous film forming foams, and in so doing, we expect that we're going to have different kinds of compounds, that we're not going to be using per or polyfluorinated alkyl substances, PFAS, but we are going to be using things that are not PFAS, so potentially alternative types of compounds, alternative surfactants. And so ultimately, we want to make sure that what we use instead of the PFAS are not going to cause us concern down the road. So in this particular statement of need, we're asking for respondents to look at these new formulations as a whole, not just single compounds, but the nominal formulations, and look at the toxicities of those formulations. And listed here are the bullets, chronic exposure experiments, and degradation products, bioaccumulation, bioconcentration should be considered. Results should yield a rank order of the relative toxicity of each of the foam formulations, and provide a justification for the species and endpoints selected for the study. And finally, describe how the proposed effort on these compounds complements previous research in the area. We, SERDP, will provide information about the formulations that we would like to be evaluated. So let's go to the next topic, the next statement of need. This one comes out of Weapon Systems and Platforms, Innovative Approaches to Fluorine-Free Firefighting Agents. And here we want to open it up a bit. So early on in like 2017, we put out a statement of need and we said, we want drop-in replacements. Well, we still want drop-in replacements, but we understand that drop-in replacements is maybe a bar that's pretty high. So we're opening it up and asking you to get as close as possible to a drop-in replacement for AFFF, aqueous film forming foam. If you're not familiar, I definitely recommend looking at the MIL spec and understanding what the requirements are that are out there today, because that's what we're aiming for. That's the bar we're trying to meet. We say that potentially sealability does not have to meet what is called out in the mil spec, and also compatibility does not necessarily have to meet what's in the mil spec, because we are opening it up and saying, you know, we have a tough problem on our hands, and we want to see what other alternatives are out there that can potentially put out fires in a military environment and do so quickly. So we also say that you can develop novel extinguishing agents and approaches, meaning that the techniques can change, the rate of application can change, but you just have to show us that you have something that is potentially going to be useful in putting out military pool fires. And finally, an initial assessment of human health and environmental impacts should be part of your proposed effort. Go on to the ESTCP solicitation. The topic area here is, again, Herb talked about the maturity. So here we're talking about things that are at least commercially available, that are not going to be something that you're doing on a lab scale, but potentially doing on at least, you know, a 28 square foot pool fire or something like that, or even larger. But we're looking for demonstrations of environmentally sustainable, fluorine-free fire suppression alternatives, and we're looking for that comparison against the current performance requirements found in the mil spec. And comparatively, we want to know how well you can match what's in the mil spec. We're not expecting that you will come in and say, I've got something that beats it or does it exactly. We want to know how close you can get to the mil spec. So in so doing, the following things are of interest: fluorine-free fire suppression agents that meet the current performance requirements, fluorine-free fire suppression agents that utilize alternative delivery mechanisms or rates, but still meet all the other criteria, and we want to evaluate these against the current test methodologies to demonstrate that the minimum performance requirements. And finally, evaluation of the impact that elevated ambient temperature would have in the performance of these formulations. So those are our topics and our statements of need. And we'll now open it up for questions.
All right, great, thank you. So we've had a number of questions come in. We will answer as many questions as time permits, focusing on those that are generally applicable to all submitters or logistical in nature. Please note that we will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. Just a moment while we pull them up.
I'll take typical funding, or I'll take typical funding levels. The question is, what are typical funding levels for SERDP and ESTCP projects? And I just generally do an average. They generally are 3-year, sometimes they go to 4, but generally 3-year, and range from 300 to 500K per year. And for limited scope, they are 200K 1 year.
Great. Next one, what are the due dates to submit proposals?
And that's, that actually has a subsidiary question about, are there calls for any topic? So maybe I was not clear in this. I apologize if I wasn't. So this is a supplemental solicitation that's focused only on AFFF replacements, both the demonstration of, as well as the R&D on development of, and the ecotoxicity. So the topics are limited. They are not open to any other research area that sort of an ESTCP would normally support. The main fiscal year 21 SERDP call will be out in late October, and the main FY21 ESTCP call will be out right after the first of the year. Usually it's the first week of the year. So we're focusing today only on these supplemental calls, and they're very limited presentations. As I said earlier, we're going to try to turn this around really quickly. So there's a question here about full proposals. So in this case, we're skipping the pre-proposal stage that we do during our standard calls, and we're going straight to full proposals. So full proposals are due at 2 p.m. September the 12th of this year. So please note that date in your calendar somewhere, and actually probably note September 11th in your calendar somewhere. Submit your proposal and away we go. So,
all right, next one is, what does an initial assessment of the human and environmental impacts entail?
So complicated question in one sense, because it could entail just QSAR, just a computational modeling approach, but we're looking for something a little bit more than that. So what we're really looking for, and certain classes of compounds, we know already what potentially the toxicity is. But if we know that and can show it and can prove it based on what's in the literature, that might be enough. If it's a class of compounds that haven't been studied in detail, then we would expect you to, put it in a pool of water and see if you kill fish or something like that.
Are proposals submitted to the federal call for proposals reviewed differently than those submitted to the BAA?
No. So I tried to indicate in those diagrams, and maybe didn't do it well enough, that they are, for technical contracting reasons, we have to solicit separately, but then they all go into the same evaluation pool and are all evaluated one against the other. So it doesn't matter which one of the ways that you hear about us or which one is appropriate for your situation to submit to. The evaluation factors are all the same.
So,
can we propose a follow-on to existing work funded by SERDP, or are you looking for only new approaches?
both would work. So if you have a funded project right now and are looking for additional scope or additional effort in that area, that would be appropriate, or you could submit a new proposal.
Is the call open to researchers from outside the U.S.?
Absolutely. We have a number at both SERDP and ESTCP, a number of performers in both Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Just because we don't have any in Africa right now doesn't mean we're not open to that. So yes, we are open to proposals and good ideas from any place in the world. Maybe not North Korea, but any place else.
For the ER project on ecotoxicity evaluation, where can proposers get the new fluorine-free formulations that SERDP is interested to test? We can only see some very limited information from the summary of the ongoing SERDP project.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting also because we're developing them as we're putting out this call. So we expect that those would be available. We would put you in contact with the organization that is making that and testing that material, and we will make sure that there's a way to get them provided to you. So the point is that that's SERDP's job to get you, yes. Oh, so we have, thank you. We have several ongoing projects right now, and when we assume that as they mature, as they are developing materials, we can derive from them the materials that will be sent out.
Are these supplemental solicitations considered seed projects limited to $200,000 for 1 year?
So no, I know it's a little confusing. SERDP actually has two different limited duration and funding projects. We have the class of proposals, excuse me, named C, SERDP. Exploratory development. Good job, Robin. Gosh, you think I know this, huh? SERDP exploratory development, that's the so-called seed. Those are intended to be high risk, high payoff. We do not have a seed call here. There's also another class of regular proposals called limited scope, and that's what's available here. So limited, there's two options. Either propose a full multi-year proposal at the sort of funding levels that Robin talked to you about earlier in the question and answer period, or propose a limited scope, one year, 200K. Now, in general, limited scope is available to turn into a regular project. So those are most appropriate for technologies in which you can't fairly price a full proposal. You need a little bit more information. You need to do a little bit of preliminary lab work. It's not a phase one, but you might think of it almost as a phase one. And in that case of a limited scope proposal, in the final report, one of the sections would be titled something like options for further research, or questions answered by the, questions raised by this research that may need answering. And so then you are eligible to submit a full proposal at the end of by invitation from the program office, a full proposal at the end of a limited scope project. So I didn't answer that. That was a relatively winding path answer, but I think I answered the question.
What are the 3 to 5 new formulations for evaluation? Will they be announced on the website or somewhere else?
So you'll get those in discussion with our program office. The bottom line is we have 7 or 8 projects that are ongoing right now that are developing formulations, and we're going to see how well they work out, and if they're worthy of the next step, we'll take them to the next step and ask for evaluation of them. There are some commercial materials available that we don't know the environmental aspects of them and the toxicological aspects of them, and so those might be part of those 3 to 5, but it'll be in conjunction with talking with the program office and some of the researchers that are currently working on projects.
How much is available for this solicitation?
So there's no set amount of money set aside for the solicitation. I think if you will read the Federal Business Opportunities announcement, we say something like $5 million that we have that we are projecting. The amount that we spend on this will depend on the number of qualified and attractive proposals we get. This is a high priority area from the Department of Defense, as it is to many agencies in the government. And so we intend to not leave high quality proposals unfunded. We intend to fund them all.
Are scale-up opportunities only for existing formulations that are commercially available?
No, we're going to be looking at both existing formulations. What it comes down to is what Herb talked about earlier in terms of maturity. So the material has to be available, but it doesn't necessarily have to be commercial.
The ESTCP website mentions the deadline as September 12th for proposals. Could you please confirm once again whether September 12th is the due date for full or pre-proposals?
Okay, well, the person who authored this question is a better proofreader than I am. We attempted to scrub pre-proposal everywhere. Those of you that know our program know that in the normal calls, we do pre-proposal, full proposal. As I said a minute ago, we're really trying to accelerate this so we can get the projects started in the spring. So in this case, we are skipping the pre-proposal step. We thought we got that everywhere. I'm sure every one of you can find one place that we didn't get it. So please, when you see pre-proposal, you just read proposal and we'll all be good.
We'll try to make that change, right? Okay.
For the ecotoxicity call, would in vitro studies be acceptable?
Yeah, they would be acceptable. I mean, you're going to propose it and we're going to look at it, and our scientific advisory board and our technical committee will be.
All right. How are funds provided to non-federal partners on DoD-led proposals?
Okay, in general, if the proposal is led by a Department of Defense agency, we tend to send the money directly to the lab or organization that is the PI, and we expect that they will have a contractual relationship with their non-federal partners. That means one movement of money from SERDP and ESTCP.
Okay.
Are you also going to entertain cleanup of fluorine formulations being used now?
Not from this call. So you will see in the regular SERDP call in late October and the ESTCP call in early of the calendar year that we will have as part of the environmental restoration program, the continuing call for these sorts of cleanup technologies. This is a call focused, the supplemental call is focused only on alternatives to AFFF. So this is materials and or procedures call only with the ecotoxicity thrown in to make sure we don't have replacement regret 6 months after we start. For cleanup, for quantification, for detection type technologies, you need to look to the standard calls.
Does a demonstration site need to be identified in the proposal?
Again, that's something the program office might be able to help with. It's nice if you can, if you have a relationship and can mention where you plan to do the demonstration, but if you don't have one identified, we can help you get that.
Can multiple proposals be submitted by the same organization?
Yes, in either of the potential meanings of that question. An organization can submit against several of the statements of need and topics, or an organization can submit several proposals against one of the statement of needs or the topic, the ESTCP topic. Clearly, this can be taken to an extreme, though. If an organization submits 10 proposals to the same topic, I can promise you that the review committee does not read the 10th one with the same open mind as they read the first one. So be realistic about that. But if you have a couple of 3 technologies that are possible, feel free to submit multiple proposals.
Is cost sharing a requirement for SERDP and ESTCP projects?
It's not a requirement, but it helps, right? So yes, one thing we are limited in our funding, and so if you come in and say I want to buy a new truck and demonstrate that I can put out fires with it, that's going to be a tough sell for us. So you have to kind of work with us on that, and if you have something that helps and cost shares with it, that works for us.
How is intellectual property protected during the proposal review?
All of the SERDP and ESTCP technical committees that I referred to early in this presentation, that are the evaluators of these projects, are all federal employees and all have on file a confidentiality agreement. So there is no concern about, there should be no concern, you may have some, but there should be no concern about intellectual property issues.
Can proposals submitted in previous years but not funded be submitted again this year?
The answer would be yes, but certainly what you need to do is kind of differentiate and tell us why, address what were the failings in the first time it was submitted. So I would expect you to have some discussion and kind of at least make some changes in the proposal rather than just sending it in again.
All right, great. So this will be our last call for questions. If you have any last minute, please send them in now, and we'll wait just a minute.
Lights are flashing.
All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If there are any other questions that are more specific to a topic area that we've received, then we will have the program manager, or rather you can contact the program manager with that question. Thank you for attending the webinar today. As a reminder, the presentation and audio will be archived for future reference on our YouTube channel and on our website. This concludes today's broadcast. Thank you.